everyone enjoyed their lunch wherever you went, wherever you are. Just go over a couple things I thought I'd do. One is, the numbers we have here today. Here in the room, we were around 130, thereabouts. We probably have some stragglers coming in, 130 to 130 or so. On the webcast, we have 187, so it's pretty good representation there. Appreciate everyone's participation, especially those of you tying in by webcast. And again, if you have a question when we get to the Q&A, there's a way to do that through your webcast, through the online screen there. And then here, of course, we actually haven't had any written questions, but you're welcome to fill out index cards, and we'll make sure those are visible. They're in the back of the room, but if you'd rather do it that way, that's perfectly fine. So for the afternoon session, this is kind of an unfunded requirement I put on Steve Pott, but he's going to be our moderator for this afternoon session here. So Steve, from the state of Colorado, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. Now we're beginning the panel number 3 of our discussions today. And the first presenter for the pipeline operators presentations this afternoon is going to be Dwayne Burton. Great.
Good afternoon. My name is Dwayne Burton. I'm an employee of Kinder Morgan, one of the largest interstate pipeline companies, actually one of the largest pipeline enterprises in the United States. I also am the acting chairperson, operator chair for the INGAA organization. I'd like to move into my presentation today to talk a little bit specifically. This is a little bit of a repeat of what happened this morning, or what was stated this morning, is that the Pipeline Safety Act of 2011 stated whether applying integrity management program requirements or elements thereof to additional areas would mitigate the need for the class location requirement. So essentially, the legislation really kind of set the direction for talking about the class locations. And in addition to this, these same concepts were clearly demonstrated in the risk management projects that cropped up in the mid-90s. Okay, that being some of these special permits for class location changeouts, as well as another important concept that this incorporates is that it was really the basis for the cost benefit of the 2003 integrity management rule. The two areas that INGAA would like to concentrate on today, these are somewhat mutually exclusive, but they fall right in line with the presentations this morning, is the concern over the class location changeouts, and also how the class location is to be handled going forward with new construction. And we put in there a bifurcated option, and it really kind of fell under that category of an alternative or multiple alternatives for going forward with new construction. The first item on the class location changeouts is there was a quote from PHMSA back in 2003 where it said the improved knowledge of pipeline integrity will result from implementing the rule will provide a technical basis for providing relief to operators from current requirements to reduce operating stresses in pipeline when population near them increases with no reduction in public safety. This is not a new concept or proposal. It was vetted during the 2002 and 2003 IAM development process. And the key here is that the operators implement and develop the IAM procedures, and that we move forward with applying those technologies going forward. One of the questions that we have with the operators within the INGAA organization is, why do we need to change out good pipe if the class location changes? The PHMSA cost-benefit decision in December 2003 was a process that indicated was going to be provided for operators as an alternative for changeouts. In other words, the integrity management could be applied, and therefore not necessarily have to change the pipe out if it was proved that the pipe was good and had integrity. Along came the special permit process. There's little certainty in that process as far as the class location change out, and the requirements for those change outs under the special permit continue to increase. The criteria for the special permit process has become very onerous and essentially is no longer an option to the pipeline companies. We revisit, the whole intent is to revisit this with this class location questions that we have out there and try to make it a more practical and appropriate criteria and incorporate it into the rules rather than it being a special permit. PHMSA in the industry has gained a lot of knowledge along the way, and we hope to be able to apply this knowledge and the new technology in order to assure and make everybody comfortable, especially the operators that are charged with managing the risk, that they can manage that risk and be able to use those IAM principles rather than spending hundreds of millions of dollars changing out pipe that has the integrity and meets the safety requirements. Saying that, INGAA does agree that in certain situations that pipe should be changed out, and that all should be incorporated into the IAM process itself. As far as developing a structured process to address the process of changing out good pipe, INGAA has formed a class location working group, and within that group we develop a process to ensure integrity in lieu of changing out good pipe. Basically, we're going back to those companies within the INGAA organization and use the existing special permit conditions as a starting point for the discussion on what's effective in mitigating the risk associated with the increased population densities. The end goal of that process would be to embed such structured conditions into the Federal Register to provide operators a consistent and transparent process by which good pipe doesn't have to be changed out. We're seeking to engage all stakeholders to reach agreeable conditions and discuss that type or condition of pipe that should be changed out. In other words, we want all the stakeholders to be comfortable with the fact that that pipe is in good shape and does not need to be changed out. The next slide really kind of shows the process, and it's been discussed several times this morning already, is that where we are right now, INGAA is using the special permit conditions as a starting point of the discussion for this particular item. Develop conditions for pipe that can proceed through the process, and they develop criteria of pipe that should not be permitted to enter the process, pipe that should be replaced regardless of what the class location is or what the population density is. Now, we'll file those comments to the meeting docket. The next item is seeking feedback from NABSTR, PST, PHMSA, and all the other stakeholders. And this would be to review the conditions and criteria and discuss and refine those conditions and criteria. And last but not least would be the rulemaking. That's our end goal, is to embed the structured conditions and criteria into the regulations and reduce the uncertainty and increase the transparency of the process. It makes sense to the operators to make sure that they focus their resources where they need to be focused. In other words, if we're spending millions of dollars to change out good pipe, those millions of dollars can be funneled to a higher risk or to a higher area that needs to be addressed. Examples of the conditions that are being reviewed by the INGAA subcommittee is that many conditions are already built into the existing I&M practices and O&M best practices. We're suggesting that we apply integrity management to the segment that's identified as a class location change, pressure test, close interval survey, inline inspection. Also take a look at removing any shielding, coating, shrink sleeves, and apply CGA best practices. There are some existing conditions that require modifications. In other words, those that exist under some of the special permits. Right now, the special permits basically indicate that, or that you cannot get a special permit for those lines that are being submitted for flow reversals, and that they're requiring to conduct the appropriate SCC assessment along the entire pipeline, not just the segment that's subject to the class location change. And also, the existing permits also require the higher level of failure pressure ratios when responding to anomalies that were identified during the integrity management process. Other conditions that are required and continue to be added on to the special permits as they are right now are such things as the ACVG or the DCVG anomaly response requirements. Now, I bring that up because sometimes if you've got a 30 or 40-year-old pipeline running ACVG or DCVG, identifies that you may have some coating anomalies that have occurred over the life of the pipeline. But there are other things such as close interval survey and other tests that can be run, including the inline inspection test, that identify that the cathodic protection is working adequately. Okay, on the second point, which is the new construction, we suggest that they provide an alternative to constructing by class location. The alternative is to existing class location methodology, not necessarily eliminating it as an option, but to include it as an additional way of looking at the new construction design. It will require deliberate revisiting of the entire code. And I completely understand what has been talked about earlier today about that this will create quite a bit of work. But, you know, in the spirit of our safety management systems, which a strong basis or philosophy associated with that is continued improvement. Sometimes that improvement takes a lot of extra effort. And I completely understand the idea that we have to have the resources in order to be able to move forward. Would only apply to new construction going forward. And we think that it would complicate matters pretty significantly if we tried to apply the PIR to legacy pipelines that are already in the ground. The new alternative would be integrated with aggressive integrity management program. We would construct to one design factor. We're proposing 0.72. And there would be special areas that were identified this morning by Steve Nanny, identified that there would be additional risk associated with certain areas. We recognize a more effective way to mitigate risk and understand consequences using the PIR, and that if we use the PIR to drive O&M requirements by defining different levels of activity based on population density. All levels would include IM principles. So in review, we identified two topics for discussion today. First of all is class location changeouts, and the second one is new construction, which we're proposing a bifurcated or alternative option to new construction. They are mutually exclusive, two separate topics, It's not all or nothing. In other words, either one of those can survive on its own. And INGAA is looking forward to the discussion of both the items going forward. And related commitments is on INGAA's part. These are related because INGAA has gone through a significant process of identifying integrity management continuous improvement. One of those includes extending the integrity management concepts and principles, and our goal and commitment by INGAA is that we will have identified or applied integrity management principles to over 90% of the population along our pipelines by 2020. And that includes assessing it based upon B31.8. And then 100% of the population along our pipelines by 2030. And then the other related commitment is that we apply fitness for service, which gets into our MAOP establishments. I'll leave the questions till the end.
Thanks a lot, Dwayne. Our next speaker this afternoon is Jerome Themick.
Just the arrows for now. Okay. Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'll try that one more time. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right. Hey, I'm Jerome Themick from Ameren, Illinois, and our company is an AGA member. And I'm going to give you LDC's operator's perspective here this afternoon. Before I do, though, I need to have my disclaimer here that the pipeline operations of local distribution companies are very diverse. The action taken on the class location change truly depends upon the characteristics of each pipeline system. And what I am showing you today, the actions taken or planned by Ameren, Illinois, may not be the same actions that other companies would take because of the diverse pipeline systems. So we got that one out of the way. I'd like to talk a little bit about Ameren, Illinois, and who we are in the perspective where I come from. On that side, we are a combination utility. We are both natural gas and electric distribution company. Our parent company is out of St. Louis, Missouri. Can I hear go Cards? Go Cards. Thank you. Thank you. We're looking forward to another great season. Our Ameren, Illinois headquarters is just on the east side of St. Louis, over in Illinois, in Collinsville, Illinois. So it's just about 10, 15 minutes outside of the St. Louis proper area. We cover a little less than 45,000 square miles. Basically, I'll show you a slide, I-80 south on that side. Our electric count, the customers that we serve from an electric perspective, are 1.2 million in Illinois, and 806,000 gas customers we have the privilege of serving in Illinois. This side. We also do have a gas operations over in Missouri, about 150,000. So total customer count, we're close to 1 million customers. On that side. The natural gas transmission system, it's 1,250 miles. The distribution system serving these customers in Illinois, it's 16,750, and we are fortunate to operate 12 underground storage fields. So showing you the service area, I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you take the top part of the state and cut it off at approximately I-80, the northern part is served by Peoples Gas and Integris Company, Nicor Gas and AGL Company, and Mid-America. Those are the primary companies that serve the upper portion of the state. And we're fortunate enough to serve the lower portion, more rural, less populated areas. The the backbone of our gas system to serve the small distribution systems that we have throughout there, that shows the backbone of it. And I'm going to be talking specifically about one of our transmission pipelines that operate from the East St. Louis area on up to Champaign, Illinois. And can I hear Go Illini? All right. I want to let you know the Illini, from a football and basketball perspective, they're solid last place, so we're doing good. So talking a little bit about this transmission system that we serve, the 1,250 miles, it is all coated in cathodically protected steel. All coated in cathodically protected steel. The vintage is 1930 to 2013. The majority of it is 50s, 60s, 70s, and newer. We just have a few miles of that less than 1940 vintage, and I believe those are being looked at for replacement in the next few years. That side. Currently, class location, the majority of our pipelines, they operate in a class 1 and 2 location, 77%, very rural area, and I'll show you some photos of that. And 23% are in a class 3 location. So, the example I mentioned earlier, we have a pipeline that runs from the St. Louis area on up to Champaign. As you can see from the image, it's a very, very rural area, farming community, basically a class 1 location. But I want to point out, take a look at that area that's highlighted in blue. We're going to dive into that one just a little bit closer. By the way, this transmission pipeline that we have, it is a 20-inch line. It was installed in 1993. The coating on it is a fusion bond epoxy coat pipeline. It is currently operates at approximately 65% of the yield strength, 65% SMICE. Class 1, Class 2 location design factors and such associated with it. During our class location study, HCA study that's performed annually, we identified, first of all, we have the house near the road there, and back behind it by the pond that's there, the triangular, that's a little farm pond in Illinois. There was a barn there, and that barn, the purpose of the barn had changed. The owner of it started a sports gym. And with the sports gym, they were doing aerobic classes. And with aerobic classes, every afternoon and every evening, they would have anywhere from 25 to 30 kids gathering doing aerobics on that side. And our pipeline lays within 89 yards of that barn. So what does that result in? A change in class location for us. A change in class location. 89 yards, a change in class location. If it was just 11 yards further out, if it was more than 100 yards, it would not have resulted in a change in class location. But in this situation, it does. So we basically looked at 5 options on how we were going to address this change in class location. We took a look at reducing the MAOP, and the line currently has an MAOP of 850 and operates anywhere from 600 to the 800 range, depending upon the load that we have in the time of the year. We took a look at installing heavier wall pipe. We also took a look at relocating outside of this high consequence area, class location area. We looked at reinforcing the pipe as a potential option, and then we took the Don Sturzma approach, and we approached the landowner and said, "Can we buy you out?" Now that approach was working real well. However, each time that we talked to the landowner, that price came up and up. I think he finally figured out what it was going to cost us to replace or relocate this pipeline. So that option went off the table. So then we took a look at some of the newer technologies that are out there. And there's some reinforcing technologies that are there that you can actually put a steel wrap around this pipe and put an epoxy coating, basically increase the strength of the pipe. Some of the data is showing approximately two folds. But what would that require us to get? A special permit. Yeah, special permit. And we actually went down that route working with the Illinois Commission, actually had all the documents, all the paperwork ready to go. We're prepared to go in for a hearing with the Commission to get approval there. They were in support of it. However, they reached out to PHMSA, and what we heard this morning from Steve Nanny is that PHMSA is not really comfortable with these special permits at this time. So the outcome of getting a special permit was somewhat uncertain. And then also we have that renewal every 5 years, which really puts things in question. And the time frame that we had to take care of this section of pipeline was 18 months, so the clock was ticking. So the decision truly was to take a perfectly good pipe that was installed in 1993 and replace it with a heavier wall pipe, and the cost was somewhere around $1.3 million, versus the solution that we had originally proposed to to reinforce the pipe would have been somewhere around 200,000 on that side, somewhere around 200,000. So those are the, those are the decisions that are real day, everyday decisions that we have to make. So taking a look at this, some of the lessons learned that we had is the current waiver or special permit process. I think anybody that's gone through it realizes it's very burdensome. Renewal process, we've talked to operators, it gets more and more complex. And the outcome is truly, truly uncertain these days if we're even able to go down that avenue. So, one approach, to think about, and I think we've heard this discussed earlier, is eliminate the waiver or the special permit process for a class location change. Let's work together to incorporate specific requirements into the 192 code. Work with all the stakeholders associated. Get that incorporated in it. Take out the guesswork on what needs to be done on that side. So I want to switch gears just a little bit. Switch gears just 1 minute here, and talk a little bit about what we should do potentially moving forward on that side. And moving forward, AGA members, we truly would support an alternative solution to maintain the MALP by confirming the integrity of existing transmission pipelines. Use an integrity-based approach. Take a look at additional actions to ensure the integrity. Those additional actions could mean running an ILI through it, doing more frequent inspections, doing direct assessments. There's a number of steps that you could take to ensure the integrity. And also take credit for additional actions already taken by operators that are out there. There are also integrity actions already taken. And then take a look at a risk-based approach. Take a look at how can we reduce the probability or the likelihood of a failure of the pipeline. How can we reduce the likelihood or probability, which would truly reduce the risk associated with it? But while we do this, let's not throw out what's currently working. Let's not throw out the class location methodology. That's still there. It has a long history of working very well, and a lot of operators are very comfortable with it, and it's truly embedded into all of our procedures: design, construction, operation and maintenance, pressure testing, so on and so forth. And when I heard the speakers this morning, one thing I'd like to say is we do agree with Steve Nanny and PHMSA and NAPSR, not to throw out the class location process. Look at a bifurcated approach. Take a look at what we can do going forward and still keep that class location in. Don't rewrite the code, because that's going to be difficult on everybody. Also would like to take a look at the scope defined by Congress. Congress really talked about focusing on transmission pipelines. And we really support that. Our entire distribution system, is currently covered by distribution integrity, or DIM. And we have just recently implemented that. We need to give that a chance to come to fruition on that side. So distribution facilities are already covered by integrity management, which is really, really critical. And third, support the idea of taking a look at that PIR approach and that sliding mile for class location changes. See where that goes, and that would be part of that bifurcated approach. Take a look at where we can go using PIR versus class location for a class location change. So, the complexity of class location. I think this was talked about earlier. We all know that it's truly embedded in the code. It's embedded in the procedures. It's embedded in our processes that we have. So would not recommend just throwing out class location, not at all. And the use of class location is also found in a number of states that have written their own regulations and such. In our Missouri operation, they do write their own pipeline safety code. It mirrors the 192 code, but they use class location. They do have some more stringent requirements. So another burden on them. But eliminating the need for class location and special permits really reduces the burden on the operators, reduces the burden on the states, and also reduces the burden on PHMSA, taking a look at those special permits and such. So if that can be embedded in the code, I think it could possibly be a win-win-win situation for the federal or PHMSA, the state commissions, and the operators. On this side. So in summary, how am I doing on time? Good. In summary, class location is fully embedded in the code. Complete elimination of class location would truly be very, very complex. Don Sturzma would probably retire if that happened. Special permit outcome is uncertain at best. It truly is uncertain at best. Special permit requirements for class location change truly should be incorporated into the 192 code. We should work together to see how we can incorporate that into the code, the requirements there. And really, in conclusion, a change in class location, as I showed today, should not result in the replacement of perfectly good pipe. When there are other solutions out there that will improve the integrity of the pipe, we can utilize those resources and allocate it to higher risk facilities inside. And I think the impact would be positive, would be very positive on the regulatory agencies. So with that, we have questions, but I believe we're going to take those after the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerome. Our next speaker is David Reha.
Jerome, I think this crowd looks more like an Iowa Hawkeye crowd. Yeah. Sweet 16, the clones. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. My name's Dave Reha. I'm with the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, and I'm also here today representing the American Public Gas Association, APGA. Who we are, IAMU, we're Iowa not-for-profit association representing community-owned utilities that we were established in 1947. We represent 51 gas utilities, 136 electric, 545 water, and 30 broadband utilities in the state of Iowa. And for APGA, they're a nationally nonprofit association of publicly owned natural gas distribution systems. APGA was formed in 1961 and is a nonpartisan organization and currently has approximately 700 members in 36 states. Overall, there's nearly 1,000 municipally owned systems in the United States serving more than 5 million customers. The reason we're here today is to talk about should class locations be eliminated and integrity management practices be taken beyond the HCA's areas and high consequence areas, and no, they shouldn't. But it doesn't make sense for the community-owned transmission systems due to their size, the type of pipe that we have, and I have some examples of that later in my presentation. We believe the focus should be, of course, risk-based and not on functional definitions. Class locations are a core part of the code, and elimination of the class locations would cause major rewrite to the code. So we need to be thoughtful on how possible changes to the code to address the high-risk transmission pipelines affect low-risk transmission pipelines. Nationally, as I mentioned earlier, there's 1,000 communities that are publicly owned in the United States. 56 of these 1,000 have transmission lines and have very low-risk pipelines. Since I had this forum today, I will veer off the topic a little bit of class locations because I think we need to discuss closely, consider the very small transmission lines and if it makes sense for them to be in the expanded transmission rules. The reason why we're in those 56 utilities are municipally owned that are in the transmission or defined as that is going back to 192.3. The definitions of transmission includes a functional and a risk-based definition, and so why we're defined that way is what I've underlined, large volume customers that are not downstream from a distribution center. Since 1970, many changes have been made to the code, but definitions and transmission haven't kept up the same. So I'd say back in the 70s through the 90s, you know, being defined as a transmission line didn't affect our systems that much. Now that the proposed rule changes and the costs, we need to determine if these small, low-stress, low-risk pipelines really should still be considered transmission lines. We would suggest that you revise the definition of transmission lines towards more of a risk-based definition, or create a new category of pipe for small, low-stress pipelines that we have in Iowa and across the country. Here's some statistics from nationally from the 2011 statistics on publicly owned systems. We have 3,000 miles of transmission line across the United States. 30 miles of that happens to be plastic. 29 miles of happens to be in the state of Iowa. It is owned by our municipal. And of the 3,000 miles, we have 1,624 miles of pipe that's less than 8 inches. That's across the country. Many of the 56 transmission lines across the country are sole feed transmission from the transmission supplier. So kind of brings up another issue or problem. There's been talk about the MAOP verification rule. You know, for us, being sole feed transmission suppliers, we just can't shut down the cities to be able to do the pressure tests for this. Pigging technologies are not available for the small diameter pipes that we're running. Even if they do design them and be able to go to the smaller pipes, it is cost prohibitive for a lot of our small utilities. Retrofitting, putting in launchers, receivers, it can greatly affect the rates of our customers for our very small communities. Here now I'm just going to specifically talk about the state of Iowa and what do we have in our systems. Of the members of mine, 51 members that I have in the state of Iowa, 18 of them have transmission lines. Total of those 18 lines is 178 miles. All of them are below 20% SMICE, and all the gas is odorized. The pipe varies from 1.25 to 8-inch diameter. Most of it, the majority of it is between 2 and 4-inch pipe. Majority of it is steel, either Schedule 80 or Schedule 40. We have a couple lines that have thin-walled pipe. And then 29 miles of plastic pipe, which are running at or below 100 pounds of pressure. All 18 of our lines in Iowa are below 20% SMICE. None of them have high consequence areas. The PIR, the potential impact radius, on 17 of those lines, it varies from 14 feet to 90 feet, and we had one line at 126 feet. We have just under 3.6 miles of Class 3 location, and the rest, 173 miles, is all Class 1 and Class 2 locations. As I said earlier, most of it is 2 to 4-inch pipe. In Iowa, we receive dry gas, and we've never noted any internal corrosion on any of our repairs or replacements on our pipelines. I thought it'd be interesting too to look at a little bit on the populations of the towns that were being served by these transmission lines. Just give you an idea of how these rules affect the small communities in the country. Our 18 transmission lines have a population from 360 to just under 14,000 people. Operating revenues below $114,000 to just under $6 million. and then meter size just under 200 meters in the smallest town, and to just under 5,000 meters on even the larger town. Half of our towns, of those 18 gas transmission lines we have below 500 meters in their cities, and their operating budgets are below $500,000. 6 towns at less than 1,000 meters are running revenues of below $1 million. 2 towns at 2,500 or less meters, operating revenues of less than $4 million, and then the largest town, less than 5,000 meters, is running at operating revenues below $6 million. Then I have this is actually one of our example cities. Is probably the smallest system in our association even, but the smallest for transmission line. It has 4.7 miles of Class 1 transmission line. It's 2-inch steel, Schedule 40 pipe, running 150 pounds, below 20% of SMICE. The gas is odorized. The town has 198 meters and 360 people in it, and the potential impact radius on that line is 17 feet. Here's an aerial view of that particular line. On the left-hand side there, you'll see where it starts. That's the DRS station, or actually that's where it ends, but and it goes on off to the right here. As you see, it's mostly, or it is, all rural settings. And there it continues on to the upper right-hand side of that slide, where we take the line from the gas supplier. And that, again, was 4.7 miles, just under that. As you can see, this is typical of our gas lines located in the right-of-ways or just inside the fields. Here, the PIR, 17 feet, it wouldn't leave the right-of-way that it lays in. So it's here's another example of the same line going through some of the fields or pastures. We talked about some of the road crossings and possible, increasing the regulations where it crosses roads, things like that. So generally our lines run in the right-of-ways of the roads, but our roads that we're running in the right-of-way are generally in rural settings, and a lot of them are running on next to Class B rock roads. And then probably the worst for road crossings or roads the right-of-way are 2-lane county paved roads. So I couldn't leave you without talking about costs what it would cost our small utilities to do possible new changes in the regulations, and what kind of effect that cost would have on those small utilities across the country, actually. So developing an integrity management plan and additional possibly remote valves that we might need to add, MLP verification. We did an estimate of the cost to be able to supply this type of services and do these services and install these systems to fulfill proposed rulemaking. And for our 18 utilities, we come up with, it'd be like $1.7 million that our small utilities would have to come up with to try to comply with this rule. But for the size and the stress of the pipe, it just doesn't make sense. The cost analysis isn't there for them to make these changes. I mean, the risk isn't there, I don't believe. So the impact, these transmission rules would cause economic devastation for a lot of these cities. Notable impact is to the residents, small businesses, and the utility itself, greatly impacting the financial stability of the small systems, would dramatically raise the rates on some of the poorest areas of our state. APGA and IAMU, we support AGA's statement where managing pipeline by integrity management rather than class location ought to be an option. but operators should continue to be able to use class locations. I told you I'd get back to it sometime. Kind of in summary, low-risk transmission lines do exist. Due to the size, diameter, the low stress, they're out there. And you need to make sure you take that into consideration when you're making these rules, because not everybody's the same, and certainly not all the transmission lines are the same. Don't eliminate or change class location concepts. It's working right now. Consider removing the functional part of the transmission definition. I'm throwing this in because you guys are here and, and I got you captured. So apply integrity management only to pipes and operating at high stress levels. Suggest that regulators create a new category for pipeline for transmissions that fit this very low risk lines that have been talking about today. And please know that any transmission rule applying to systems like the transmission systems we have in Iowa and other small communities that APGA represents, that please consider that when making those changes to your regulations. And thank you.
Thank you, David. And last but not least, Alice Radcliffe.
Good afternoon. I'm Alice Radcliffe, and I work for XTO Energy. And we are one of 130 member companies that are part of GPA, or Gas Processors Association. And GPA is primarily responsible for, okay, let's just see. There we go. They are primarily involved in the midstream phase of the natural gas transportation. And I wanted to talk to you today about gathering. And unlike some of the members of our panel today, I asked to be here. Gathering is so often talked about, represents a concern for many of you, and yet it's often left out of the conversation. And so I wanted gathering to be a part of this conversation today and talking about class location methodology. And so because GPA represents a large part of gathering, I felt like it was an opportunity for us both to be represented today. This pie chart represents pipelines that we provided in the ANOPR comments that we filed back in 2012. It is a gathering pipe that operates at greater than 20% of SMICE, and obviously it's in Class 1. And you certainly see at the bottom it shows, if I can get this little thing to work. I'm used to having a clicker, y'all, and this doesn't have a clicker, so. But bear with me, 45 companies participated in this survey, and 132,000 miles are represented in this pie chart. And again, this only represents the pipe that is operating at greater than 20% of SMICE. And again, it is Class 1 pipe. So what requirements apply to onshore gathering today? We must comply with all the requirements that are applicable to transmission, with the exception of ILI, smart pigs, or integrity management. Again, as you've heard all day today, class locations are based on population density. We believe it is risk-based because it does affect people, and certainly the sliding mile, the 660 feet, or the 220, thank you, 220 yards, which represents 2 football fields. The higher the class location, the more stringent the requirements, the more stringent the regulations, the more operators are required to do in order for us to have a license to operate. We certainly consider pipeline pressure. Obviously, class location design factors is that safety factor that we consider when building pipelines. As we've already talked about, obviously lots of areas are embedded into 192 that are affected by class location. And again, even though integrity management does not apply to gathering, it still is called out when you're discussing HCAs in the rule. Some of the advantages of using class location, obviously now we've had 8 years of utilizing this methodology. It does work. We are very familiar with it. It provides us some consistency in allowing us to utilize the latest and greatest technology. We are able to address the risk to people. We believe we can demonstrate compliance, and certainly allows us to identify and allocate our resources and put those resources where we believe are higher risk. I wish I could tell you that all of our pipeline projects were able to build like this. We certainly strive to build in areas like this. We're just not always able to do that. And because of that, we do build to higher class locations to try and anticipate growth around our pipelines. I have 2 examples, and certainly it's to reiterate some of what Steve shared with us this morning. I took a 4-inch piece of pipe at 1,200 pounds just to compare the science of a PIR versus a 660-foot buffer. And if you certainly see the 108-foot is your PIR, a very much smaller area would be impacted as opposed to the class location. And again, I've used class 1 locations. Clearly, this is only showing you 9 homes are within the 660-foot buffer, but clearly within that 108-foot, you would not have any impacted. And to reiterate that, certainly going back to the previous pie chart, where we reported the class 1 pipe, if you'll notice there was 41% of that pipe is less than 4 inches. We believe that's a significant amount of pipe. The next example is obviously a 24-inch piece of pipe, same pressure, 1,200 pounds, 660-foot buffer, or the PIR, which is calculated at 574 feet. And again, to Steve's point, obviously, unless you're building greater than a 30-inch diameter piece of pipe and operating over 1,000 pounds, you're probably not going to get a PIR outside of the 660 buffer. So in conclusion, we do believe that class location methodology should be retained, especially for the pipelines presently in service. We do believe it is risk-based. If the PIR concept is adopted going forward, we do believe you should have a choice. The maintenance inspection requirements and the intervals, both, would have to be appropriate for both class locations and PIRs. Saving questions for the end, Steve? And obviously, I live in a class 3 area, and we talked this morning about human occupancy. My children are grown, my grandson's a teenager, so I still have family. And we live in this class 3 area, and we do care that our risks are managed appropriately along those pipelines. Thank you.
Thank you for our industry speakers. Now we open it up to our question time slot. If there's any questions here coming from the members in the room.
Yes, Steve, Ian Calhoun, NAB again. Heard a lot of very interesting concepts today that I really appreciate. Buying out HCAs, for example. Bifurcation. Probably should have said that may very well be how Canada goes forward, is the bifurcation approach. Although the graphic I saw of the diverging roads gave me a very uncomfortable feeling in the groin. So we may call it parallel, but I think the idea is that we would retain the best of both. However, my question is to Dwayne, or maybe to Steve and Annie. There was some mention of a constant design factor, which I think I understood. And then there was a mention of a design factor for special cases, I think was what Dwayne said, but earlier on it was Steve that said it was for stations. So I want to ask specifically for stations, and I think that's maybe what you were talking about, Dwayne. Why would you have a special design factor for stations? Two-part question. Why would you have a special design factor for stations? What's the rationale behind it? And the second one is really what comprises a station. Where would that piping be, say, with respect to the station fence?
Well, that too has been a little bit of a question over the years as to where you stop and start your additional design factor. But I think to get to your point, my suggestion, or a suggestion that we develop within INGAA, is that if we went to a PIR/integrity management process going forward on new construction, that there could be areas that have been identified by the stakeholders that need above and beyond the 0.72 or whatever the design factor is that we apply to that particular, I guess you'd call it pipeline design. There would be areas, and there were some mentioned this morning, like limited mobility, maybe concentrated areas like schools, those type of things that could possibly require a higher design, or in this particular case, lower number design factor, a higher design. And that's what I was alluding to in my presentation. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions from the room? Don?
Don Stursma, and this is for Dwayne. It sounds like you're looking at this whole issue primarily from the standpoint of class location change or new construction. But one of the other issues is, and I believe you said that you eventually plans to apply integrity management practices to all pipeline with anybody living next to it. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct. That's a published commitment that the INGAA members have by a certain time frame. In this particular case, was 2030.
Okay. And are you looking at applying the same principles to every piece of pipe, or would you apply maybe different levels depending on the population density along the pipe?
It could be different levels depending upon the population density, but in general, IM principles as they stand right now.
Okay, and if we eliminate class location as a criteria, how would you know where or how to apply the different levels of the integrity management process? I mean, as soon as you do anything population or risk-based comparison, you need a system, and what's wrong with the system we've already got?
Well, in the presentation, we said that to go back and try to apply the PIR to the legacy pipeline systems that are out there would be almost impossible from our perspective. You almost have to do that prospectively as far as using it as a design basis. So you would be using the class location design on all the legacy pipelines, okay? But you would apply integrity management principles to any place along your pipeline that has any type of population density, whether it's to 100% of the population that lives along our pipeline. Okay, there's going to be areas where there's no populations. But as we all know, as you apply some of the integrity management principles such as ILI, you're going to be picking up a lot of the pipeline when you're doing ILI, and you're going to be looking at the data that comes back off of those ILI, and you're going to be recommending or analyzing and making the anomaly responses based upon what you have, regardless of whether there's people along your pipeline. All we're saying is that commitment-wise, because of the risk, that we say that we're concentrating all of our efforts along our pipelines where people exist, where population exists along our pipeline.
And that was the commitment that we made, was 100%, using IM principles.
Would it be of assistance to you if there was a class location change, you had the option of looking at what's within 660 feet or 300 depending, and what the potential impact radius is, and being able to say that if the class location change structure or structures is outside of the PIR, that you would feel that you do not need to go through the various pipe changes currently required by a class location change? Would that help you?
Well, I think as responsible operators, if it's flagged as a class location change, and one of the alternatives is to use the technologies that we have and do an integrity management assessment of that section to identify that the section of pipe is integrity, I think that it would behoove us to use the PIR or the 660, whichever is the greatest. Okay, so I don't think that any of the members have said that if the PIR is less than the 660, that we wouldn't go out to the 660 to use the integrity management along that particular corridor. One other item is that it struck me this morning, just a little bit of play on words, when you said the pipelines are getting bigger and badder. I had to ask the guy next to me, did he say bigger and better or bigger and badder? Yeah.
Do we have any other questions out from the viewing audience? No, we do not have any questions any more here in the room. So with that ends this panel of discussion, and go to the public perspective.
Yeah, well, let's take a 15-minute.
Okay. 15-minute break. If you'd like to come back about 2:15.